Welcome to Fintech Daydreaming, the podcast that dives into the world of banking technologies and the ever-changing landscape of fintech companies. We bring you real-life examples from global and local thought leaders, as well as experts working within the financial industry, and seek out the best stories from the front lines of financial services innovation, where dreams of industry pioneers meet reality. Hosted by Paul Krogdahl and Ville Sontu. This is Fintech Daydreaming.
Welcome back, dear listeners, to another fantastic episode of Fintech Daydreaming. As you can see, we are again in the studio, and that's because we're here with Fintech Farm to do another episode of our Nordic Fintech highlights. The episodes that are done in partnership between Fintech Daydreaming and Fintech Farm, looking at what is hot, what is cool, what's interesting and what's exciting in the world of fintech in the Nordic region. So Jana, what is hot, cool, exciting and interesting for the October month?
Well, surprisingly, a trending area of fintech is payments.
Okay, yeah.
Wow.
What a surprise! Payments.
Yeah, there's been quite many things obviously happening in that area, but there are also other things such as impact, accounting tech, and a few other topics. But yeah, generally if we look at how the market is acting at the moment, I was a bit worried at some point that is it going to be so that all the investments are going to the scale-up companies and only the strongest will survive. But now, last month, we actually saw quite a few very early stage seed, pre-seed investment rounds in financial management softwares, climate and impact fintech. So there's clearly also room for new innovations. And then the biggest funding round of the month was Bright Payments. They raised $60 million US, so they're doing account-to-account payments in the Europe. Pretty impressive, only a 4-year-old company and already working in 25 markets. So yeah, payments are leading the way.
Payments. I mean, last episode that we did, the focus that you pointed towards was investments.
Yeah.
That there had been lots of investments during September.
Yeah.
And now in October, there's still some investments, but it's pivoted a little bit back more towards payments again, you're saying?
Yeah. But payments was the biggest area, but there also some traction in the other fields. Otherwise, quite interesting was that the biometric companies were quite active in signing new deals. So companies who are making, for instance, payment cards which has a fingerprint scanner. Yeah. And personally, I'm not really sure why would I need one of those, because I already have the scanner in my phone. What about you guys?
Yeah, no, I already have it in my phone.
Yeah, same thing. There is a niche there, however, because, for example, the Digital Euro project wants to issue cards. Yeah. So these cards are mainly aimed at people who don't have access to smartphones or devices with biometric readers. So maybe there's an element of this kind of underbanked or under digitally served population that might be benefiting from those types of solutions. But yeah, so this idea of a fingerprint scanner on a card has been around for 10 years at least, but it has never reached scale. But let's see.
So I've got two more following questions, just looking generically at what's happened during October. I was expecting AI, generative AI, to sort of explode out and continue growing. But you're saying that in the Nordics, what we're seeing still is a predominant growth in payments rather than AI.
Yeah, well, everyone is talking about AI, obviously, and I think Klarna is every month in the news about, investing in AI, exploring AI, getting their employees to use AI, and that's something that is happening. But AI-wise, we don't have that many purely AI-focused fintech companies in the Nordics yet that would be booming that much. Obviously, last month we talked about AlphaSense, but otherwise, I don't see that the crazy boom which is going on in the US. We don't have that in the Nordics or in the fintech yet, but I think it's a matter of time.
Just a matter of time.
Yeah. So you mentioned US there. So I just came back from Money 2020 in Vegas, and obviously generative AI and AI in general was like I'd say maybe half of all the sessions and half of all the vendors, but that was all they were talking about. But the hype has reached a point in the US right now in fintech. The generative AI element of the fintech conversation has reached a point where a lot of these companies have actually already experimented with generative AI, and they're coming to a realization that, well, it's never what it actually hyped up to be, but since they have experimented, now they're coming up with these new kind of real, tangible use cases for generative AI. But the problem with those use cases is that everything I observed was they're quite boring actually. So they're kind of mid-office, back-office, data cleaning, synthetic data, fraud detection, all these kind of assistive tools to kind of this boring banking operations, more or less. So there's not going to be like a boom of now we have a chatbot that knows everything about financial services to serve you, at least not yet. But yeah, it's definitely a big trend still.
No, it's interesting. I mean, you guys know that I did work for IBM, right? It was actually officially my last day today, so I'm unemployed after we finish this episode. But you know, within sort of IBM, they've done an awful lot around generative AI, and I agree with you completely. A lot of the use cases that are coming out as being strong use cases around generative AI, IBM, we're talking Watson, is very much around back office support. But the other thing that IBM is putting an awful lot of effort into is code conversion. So, you know, modernization of COBOL code to Java or something else using AI capabilities. And I think that's another space we're going to see a growth of this is, you know, helping around the coding and the modernization of existing legacy systems, etc.
Yeah, this Copilot development is a very important case, not only for code conversion, but also coding in general. But the very important element, especially in financial services there, is that you do need the person who actually knows what they're doing and only use it as an assistant. So I think we're fooling ourselves if we're thinking that the AI will do the development and we can just put it into production directly. So there's going to be always this co-pilot element that
yes, AI is not going to take our jobs.
No.
But the other element that I wanted to pick up on very quickly, because I mean, you work in payments. You sit right in the middle of payments, digital wallets, admittedly not focused that much on the Nordics, more on emerging markets yet. But what do you feel about this continued growth of payments focus in the Nordics? I thought we had that ticked off. I mean, instant payment, okay, P27, but you know, instant payments, everything else, we're quite advanced. Aren't we reaching saturation?
We're going to be talking about instant payments in the Nordics in one of the topics I picked up for the discussion later. But the fact that payments continues to be a topic is because we still lack cross-border interoperability. We lack interoperability between the schemes. So technically, if everybody downloads the same application, you can do instant payments today, person to person, 24/7, 365. But as soon as you're on another network, it doesn't work. Yeah. You mentioned that I work in emerging markets, so in mobile money deployments, for example, in Africa, where everybody uses mobile money. This has been the trend there for more than a decade now, and still there are only a few countries that actually have reached interoperability, even though everybody has a mobile money account on their phones. And typically, when we do see interoperability, is driven by regulation and government infrastructure kind of stepping in to kind of bridge this gap between competing entities to actually reach this interoperability. The problem is that interoperability is not a use case, it's not a business case for anybody, at least in the short term. In the long term, it always will be, but it's very difficult to justify those investments in the short term. That
actually lines us up very nicely to talking about some of the specific, you know, news elements from the October month that we've all picked out. I'll start with mine. Back to what you were saying about payments and growth and, you know, regulators, etc. The one that I picked up on in your newsletter was around Tieto Every Banking. Now, Tieto Every Banking have partnered with the Maldives Monetary Authority to set up a instant payment system for the Maldives that they're calling Favara. Now, this to me is, you know, back to what you're saying, I think it's fantastically interesting. One, it's driving instant payments. It is working towards, you know, bringing on the, you know, financial inclusion in the region. It sets them up for, you know, streamlining domestic payments. It sets them up to start driving cross-border transactions. And it's being driven by, you know, the authorities in the country, which is fantastic. The other thing that I think is great is obviously when we talk about fintech, we tend to only focus on the startups.
Yeah.
And we almost forget that there are successful financial technology companies that have been around for some time. I mean, Tieto Every Banking, in fact, I believe you even used to work for Tieto at some point in your past. Tieto Every Banking, we should also promote what they are doing. They are a good fintech, they are doing some good stuff, and they are recognized almost globally as a leader in payments.
Yeah,
so
they're actually one of the biggest payment companies in the world.
Exactly.
In certain extent, yeah.
So I think from my perspective, this was a great win for them, and I think an interesting success story. I mean, what do you think? You, again, in payments.
Well, first of all, congrats to Tieto Every for picking up a place like Maldives.
I agree. We should have actually been there for some sort of project.
Yeah. So I think they had some really interesting workshops in the Maldives coming up to this deal. But in all seriousness, again, this is a trend that we're seeing almost like globally, and we can always refer back to what is the biggest success story for instant payments on a national level, and that's the India stack, of course. Yeah. So in India, they built this national infrastructure for P2P account-to-account payments. Then they linked that with the identity infrastructure that they have in India. And that model basically wiped away the onboarding problem and the settlement problem between schemes, because that became a commodity provided by the government. That has caused an explosion in fintech and financial inclusion in India, and I think that's those two elements, basically having the payment rails available and having the digital identity available, are kind of these catalysts for fintechs in any country or region. And Maldives seems to be following that same trend. So I don't remember whether the Maldives had a digital identity scheme on the side of that, but this element of solving this person-to-person payment or instant payment infrastructure problem by the government or publicly funded element of doing that is a sign that this model is going to be picking up. In fact, one of the usual things that I say when anybody asks about what are the kind of trends in the next 5 years, I always mention that it is basically shared public infrastructure for payments and identity that will be paving the way for a lot of things moving forward globally, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for a lot of financial institutions, payments and cards is not a unique value proposition, and it's just a cost.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So public infrastructure helps in that direction. So yeah, what do you think about the news?
Yeah, very interesting case, and I've been thinking that in order to implement something like that, Maldives actually could be like quite an optimal market, because it's not too big. I don't know what's the legacy and the former policy around that, but I think that's maybe a market that you could actually implement it. If you want to do something similar in the European scale, then you have hundreds of millions of people and different standards and legacy systems and a huge fight. So it's really cool that they have succeeded there, and it's interesting to see in the future if they can also implement it in bigger scale.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I checked for but I couldn't find was Maldives has got a huge amount of tourism.
Yeah.
Right? So how are they going to support the tourists in this infrastructure, right? Is it going to be a case of you land at the airport, download an app and off you go, or do you have to do KYC? Suddenly, you need to have a Maldives driving license and you're locked out of the payment system in the Maldives as a tourist and stuck, right? So interesting dynamic there. But what news item did you pick out?
Actually, on a related topic, so partly related, because the Bank of Finland, so the Central Bank of Finland, a part of the Euro system under the ECB, but still the National Central Bank of Finland, they came out on October the 18th, basically saying two main things. Number one, their full support for the digital euro project, which is now being launched by the ECB. So they reached at the end of the research phase of the digital euro, and now they're moving into an implementation and testing phase. Mm-hmm. And they always want to emphasize, by the way, that none of this is still a decision to actually launch the digital euro. So they always want to emphasize that they will make that decision once they reach the point where they have lock down the entire system, and then they might decide not to even launch it. Okay. But anyway, so that's a very clear point that they wanted to make. So this kind of statement from the Bank of Finland was really all about again, supporting the digital euro, creating kind of narrative around why is the digital euro being launched and why it's important, why Bank of Finland thinks it's important. But the other part of the news was also interesting, and that was the fact that Bank of Finland supports, same as Maldives, instant payment rails in Finland. So again, solving the problem of interoperability for instant person-to-person payments, typically with mobile originated payments, not necessarily mobile terminated, but mobile originated payments, and with a national infrastructure where that's available 24/7, 365. And kind of interesting thing, I actually read the paper they released. The paper was already released in August 23, a few months ago. But I read the paper this morning, and it was funny. I noticed because what the Bank of Finland had done with the paper, as they should, they worked with the European Payments Council on the best practice models on what would a scheme like that look like. And I was reading the paper, and then I saw an image there, which was kind of very familiar looking to me. So then this is way too familiar. So then I realized, in 2010, again, I was actually working for Tieto back then, so Tieto Every these days. And I was working with Mobi Forum on a white paper about mobile remote payments. This was a group of people, many EPC members there, some people from SWIFT and different banks around Europe. We authored this white paper. It's like 120 pages or something, and we released it in 2010. And it was talking about these operational models for instant payment schemes and what they could look like. Back then, we didn't have anything. So we were basically just kind of saying that this is what the ecosystem could look like. We drew up some images in there, and I kid you not, the image on the Bank of Finland paper was the exact same image that we had there in 2010. They didn't even bother change the icons, so it was the exact same thing. So all the kind of referencing aside, I think it's a wonderful thing that stuff that we were working on, discussing about already in 2010 is not reinvented. So those models work. It's just about implementing them and finding consensus in the industry that this is actually going to be the way to build these schemes. So again, a happy coincidence this morning, and another example of this national infrastructure solving maybe some problems even here in Finland.
Yeah, I was secretly watching the discussion that you kicked off on LinkedIn with all the comments coming onto it. So yes, I saw that. Yeah. What do you think about this news?
Yeah, actually, one thing you already brought up is that they seem to have clear plans on how to proceed and implement it, but then the decision, are they actually going to make it, is what I think is actually the biggest thing, because I believe there will be still a huge fight, a lot of lobbying from the private banks that is this going to ever happen, and I'm looking forward to see that phase of the discussion as well. Yeah. I mean, it's good to have plans and initiatives to use technology, but yeah, the political side between the discussion between the central bank, the authorities, and the private banks, that's something we will still.
Yeah. So to be clear, you're referring to the digital euro part. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So setting the instant payments aside for a moment. Yeah. Yes, I agree. So the digital euro project has reached its end of the 2-year cycle for the research phase. The European Central Bank has published all the papers. So for anybody out there who might be thinking that there's some kind of conspiracy theory going around the digital euro, no. You can go to the ECB website and you will find every single document that they have produced, including the full design of the digital euro, and you can study those papers and see how exactly it's going to work, if it's going to be launched. But like you said, there's going to be a big political debate, because the digital euro, of course, the Commission is now proposing to the Parliament to give the European Central Bank the right to launch it, and this is going to go through all the national legislation, and each country will have to decide individually whether or not they're going to vote this in. And as we know, with all political processes, this might get derailed in so many ways. But the intent of the European Central Bank seems to be quite clear. Even though when they say that there is no decision made, they're making it very clear that this is inevitable. So we're going to do this in one way or the other anyway, so you might as well get prepared for launching that. So when you talk to people at the European Central Bank, that consensus is coming out very clearly, including with people with Bank of Finland.
Yeah. But I think at the risk of derailing us and ending up down a soggy, wet rabbit hole here for a minute, I mean, you and I have lots of discussions around central bank digital currencies. We've had that ever since the notions came along, and before that we were joyfully discussing the world of cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin and all of those fantastic things that I absolutely despise. But central bank digital currencies I support. I like the idea of it. I think there is value there. I can also understand why the general society, if I can put it that way, are panicking. I think partially because we're living in a world of social media spreading false news. There are social influencers and non-influential people that are creating an awful lot of miscommunication around central bank digital currencies and everything else. I mean, there's discussions around all of your money will end up being central bank digital currency. It will expire. You must spend it. This is controlled by the government, etc., etc. I think it's critical for us to continue to understand the notion that cash isn't going away. Private money, which is the money that you have in your bank account, is not going away. What we're basically getting is a third representation of money. And these three worlds would coexist. Mm-hmm. And I think it might actually be worth, even though we're moving off slightly, if you can, just take a minute to think about, explaining how you feel these three, because you've been closely working with this, how these three different varieties of money are going to coexist, and potentially what Finland might be thinking about this going forwards. And for the individuals out there, what might this look like? What might this mean?
Yes. So I'm going to speak from the perspective of the digital euro. So again, there's many central bank digital currency projects all around the world. They have different purposes and they have different goals in different parts of the world. But from the perspective of the ECB and the digital euro, they've made their intents very clear. So as you said, today we have cash and we have private bank money. The problem with cash is that obviously you cannot use cash online. So the central bank is saying that it is only fair that we offer a central bank liability also in the online world. So again, private bank money or the retail bank money that we have today is a liability of the retail bank. It's not a liability towards the central bank. So central bank feels that there needs to be this alternative. The other thing that the central banks, the ECB is always making very clear is that cash is not going away. Physical cash will always be there. This will be at best a complementary solution to physical cash, and they will continue to support physical cash, until further notice, I would say. This is not to replace cash in any shape or form. And the private sector, of course, they have legitimate concerns about this, because what you're ultimately doing is you're replicating the same kind of value proposition that's already existing in the private sector. We already have cards, we already have instant payments, we already have ways of doing everything that the digital euro is going to do as well. And they're asking the question, why do we need this digital euro?
Exactly.
Because from a consumer standpoint, there really is no difference.
Yeah.
The only thing, it's just another pocket where you move digital value, and yes, it happens to be a central bank liability, but what does that even mean for me? Ultimately, not that much, especially because the ECB has made it very clear that the holding limits for the digital euro will be very low, so comparatively low. So you cannot have like hundreds of thousands of euros in your digital euro balance. It's meant to be like a temporary storage. So, and they're also disincentivizing people to actually keep a kind of a balance or a balance on the digital euro account for a long time. And on top of that, they are kind of also outscoping corporate payments. So there's not going to be a business-to-business payment ever with the digital euro, at least not from a formal basis. And even the merchants that accept the digital euro are not allowed to hold it. So what actually happens is that when you pay with the digital euro, the merchant automatically gets converted into private bank money on the back end of that. So the merchant limits are 0 for the digital euro. All of these mechanisms to make sure that the stability of the financial system remains. There's a 1 euro in your bank account is going to be the exact same euro on the ECB wallet. So that balance will never shift. It's going to be 1-to-1 always.
And you actually made a critical comment there that I think a lot of people have misunderstood, because there is a notion that there's one or the other. But the truth is that you can move, right?
Yes.
Central bank currency can very easily become private bank money, and vice versa.
It's completely seamless.
It's completely seamless.
So they have they've developed this, and I encourage everybody who's interested to actually go to the ECB website and look at these models. But they have developed what they call a waterfall model and a reverse waterfall model. So that means that even though your holding limit for the digital euro might be, let's say, some thousands of euros, you are able to pay for your car with the digital euro if you want. What happens in the background is that it does this automatic top-up from your account, and then it kind of flows back from the digital euro into the private bank account. It just kind of takes this extra leap from the digital euro small balance that you have. But again, like you mentioned, it's going to be seamless. So you won't, if you set it up the way you want to set it up, it's going to be flowing seamless. The only exception, and I will end here, is the offline payment feature, which they're also including in the digital euro, which is kind of interesting. There's a very small amount of money that you can actually load to an offline balance of the digital euro, but that you actually have to do manually. So there's never going to be an automatic online-offline conversion. You have to do that manually. Then you can do basically anonymous or private payments between offline wallets of the digital euro, but ultimately that will still flow back to online at one point in time. That is the equivalent of using like an ATM today. So you go to an ATM, you put in your card, you get the cash. Nobody's able to follow how the cash then moves around, but ultimately when you deposit back, then you also identify yourself. And because of these things, the limits are extremely low. They're also monitoring that you cannot have like a forever chain of things. So you can't have like 1,000 hops. You actually have to go online at certain intervals.
What do you think about central bank digital currencies? Are you pro or not?
I'm not really. I don't have a clear opinion yet, but I can clearly see that a lot of normal consumers are lacking information. They don't know that the big idea is how the money works between central banks and private banks, and it doesn't really like make a difference for consumers.
Yeah.
And people who have a little bit of a tinfoil hat tendency, it's a really juicy topic to hit up with, that hey, they are creating this because they want to monitor our spending or everything. So I think that we should, or the central bank should communicate this clearly to people, like what is the idea behind this. But personally, I don't have really like a
strong point of view.
Strong point of view.
Yeah.
How should it work?
There's one more point that I want to make, which is that the people talk about, well, what if people don't use the digital euro? Well, actually, the ECB and the Bank of Finland, they don't want people to use it too much. I mean, they actually they were going to launch it. It's going to be an option for people to use. But if it's ultimately just a minority of people using it, they don't care. It's an option. It's a counterbalance to the private solutions out there. So again, the point is not to make the digital euro like the dominant payment method across Europe. It really is a complementary solution to the existing one. And if it doesn't pick up, that's fine as well.
I'll actually bring another dynamic to this discussion, which I'm sure most of the general listeners or general population in EU are probably not aware of, because we discussed this, I think it must be about a month or two back. There is a policy in the EU around expenditure of cash, and it's actually illegal already in certain countries, and it's going to become spreading across more countries, to execute cash transactions of too high a value. So I think in Finland I'm not sure if they've already implemented it in Finland, but in some countries a cash transaction over, I think it's 3,000 euros, is actually illegal, right? So everybody is talking about, you know, the control and everything else. Well, even with cash, there are certain, you know, limitations and regulations that should be followed. Now, whether you follow them or not, I mean, who's going to know? But it's still there. I mean, go and Google it, look it up. Apparently, you can go to jail if you make a cash transaction which is too high. So that's an interesting notion for going to jail, right? So, what was your news article?
Yeah, so I picked a few news about new banks entering the market. So now I'm talking about fintech banks.
Yeah.
As we know, we have seen in the Nordics quite a few fintech companies getting a banking license. Aprila in Norway, Lunar, Denmark, Klarna from Sweden. Yeah. And now the latest one from Sweden was Cred, focused on business lending. They got their banking license in the spring. Now they activated it. Obviously, banking license gives you a lot of new opportunities, but also awful lot of responsibilities. Yeah. In Finland, we actually now got from the latest report from Alisa Bank that, you know, they are struggling a bit to maintain the balance sheet and all the requirements on that side. But generally from Finland, we have not seen new banking licenses being granted by the FSA. Never in the fintech era, actually.
No.
But what has happened, there's a Finnish fintech company called Saldo. They got the banking license from Lithuania. Lithuania has been very active in this field, especially after Brexit. They've been promoting that, hey, you want to work in the EU market, get your fintech business here, get an easy banking license or EMI license, especially to the British companies. And that's been quite, well, there's been a lot of happening or new companies entering or establishing in Lithuania. And that's what Saldo also did. They went to Lithuania, got the license, and now they passported it back to Finland, and now they're operating in Finland. And I think the funny question, or the question here is that who's winning here? Like, they obviously have the branch and most of the jobs in Lithuania, but then they still come to the Finnish market, and you know, what's the risk versus benefit for the nation, for Lithuania or Finland? What do you think?
I see two elements to this, and I think it's not just in the Nordics, I think it's global. I mean, we're seeing a expanded growth of neobanks. They're like mushrooms. They're popping up all over the place, right? Yeah. Some of them are going for full banking license. Some are going for an e-money license. Some of them are on that journey. I mean, Revolut did that journey. And I think Revolut as well they're not licensed in Finland. They operate in Finland, but they're, again, licensed in Lithuania. Yeah. But we're also seeing a lot of neobanks starting to collapse, right? So I think we are at an interesting inflection point where how much are people going to trust the new kids on the block? How much are they going to trust their money into these things? And therefore, maybe we'll see a resurgence back towards the traditional banks. You know, in Finland, I can imagine, yes, probably a lot of people are going to try it. They might, you know, have Revolut accounts, but I guarantee you that most people have their salaries paid into a Nordea account or an OP account or a Säästöpankki or whatever the case may be here in Finland, and then they'll move some money to a neobank to play with, to check out the new capabilities and services and lounge access or whatever the case may be. But I do worry that we're seeing a proliferation of neobanks, and therefore we're going to start seeing a fundamental growth of mergers and acquisitions and collapses of these neobanks. That's my view. I mean, what about you?
Well, you made the analogy to mushrooms, right? So the shelf life of a mushroom is, well, fairly short.
Unless you dry it out.
Yeah, and exactly. So some of them actually make you hallucinate as well. So that's another story. But let's not get down into that rabbit hole. The again, Finland seems to be a little bit late on this trend. So if we look at what happened in the UK, this has already been happening for the past 10 years with the Revolut, the Monzos, Starlings, and all these kind of fintech darlings that everybody talks about all the time. But at the back of that, if you look at the statistics in Europe or even globally for digital banks, especially when it's retail-focused banks like Revolut and others, they don't tend to do well. And the problem is exactly that. So when they launch with a simple debit card solution, you might have a very fancy app and a checking account there with a very limited set of services. People might move money in there for just to try it out, but ultimately payment is a payment, card is a card. I mean, it's you get some fancy features on the kind of your personal finance management and all of those things, but they don't tend to be enough for people to switch over to use in daily use. Some of the banks like Revolut have then started attaching like a million things on top of it, and that actually is an attractive value proposition for many people who are in this space. So I personally use Revolut a lot. I use it on my daily payments. It's not my salary account. It never will be, but I constantly move money back and forth from Revolut, and I use it every day, mainly because it has such a versatile set of features that I can use on almost like a daily basis. But most people are not like us. Most people don't actually do these things, so they're happy with one bank, and that's why they're struggling. The counterpoint to that actually is that especially the banks that are focusing on a certain segment. So we have already talked about many times in the podcast how especially the SME segment is very underserved when it comes to digital financial services. The SME services provided by the incumbent banks are at best horrible, to be honest. And there is a niche there. So if you're able to find a value proposition for an underserved segment like the SMEs and do that well, then you might be onto something, because especially in the market the size of Finland, the retail proposition is very, very difficult to make profitable.
Yes, no, I agree, and there's already enough banks to a certain degree in Finland as well. But you're right, the SME space is very interesting. But I also think a lot of people get excited about the new value propositions that the Revoluts, etc., are bringing them. But they don't actually realize that a lot of their traditional banks have some of those capabilities and offerings already. It's just that the traditional banks are maybe not as good as advertising them or making them available as the Revoluts, etc. And then, yes, I admit, and we've had this discussion before, banks very often are slow by design rather than anything else, and therefore it takes them some time to bring out new features. But at the same time, very often I see banks, traditional banks, bringing out new features because it's a FOMO, right? They bring out a new feature because the neobanks have brought it out, but they haven't thought about the value proposition and the reason for bringing it out, which means that even though they bring out those new features, it's feature function, it has no business value behind it, and therefore the customers don't get excited anyway. You gonna open up an account?
Yeah, actually, I know Lunar is now going to come to Finland with a bit bigger plan.
Yes.
It's interesting to see like what's their strategy. Are they going to passport? Because the passporting thing is kind of when we talk about the internet era. So who's going to stop me from using a foreign bank which is not licensed in Finland? Are they going to block it on the internet or what?
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think the only thing that will stop you is KYC.
Yeah.
Right. So, but fantastic. Some interesting news articles. Any last thoughts from you around the trends you've seen and what you maybe predict for November?
Well, I think it's not too many surprises. Like I said, seems that the traditional fields are quite going strong. Also, to mention a few things, so we also saw Icano Bank and Aktia Bank investing in new technology. So Temenos Payment Hub for Aktia and Icano investing also to some cloud features. But yeah, I think that's it. Would you like to hear a joke?
I was just getting to that. I was getting to the roundup of the episode and saying that we've done all the serious stuff and now time for some light-hearted entertainment. So yes, as our honorary joke master for these episodes, what's your joke?
Okay. Why did a wine grape quit its job at Deposit Solutions?
No idea.
It didn't want to become raisin yet.
You dried up with the mushrooms.
You did give us a fair warning that it's going to be a bad pun, but yeah, I actually enjoyed that, so thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you very much. Excellent. Thank you everybody for having joined us on this episode of the Nordic Fintech Highlights. The newsletter has been sent out. You can subscribe to the newsletter from Fintech Farm in the link that you'll find below. If anyone wants to know anything more about Fintech Farm, what you guys are doing, or the newsletter, how can they find you? How can they reach you?
Yeah, they can find us at helsinkifintech.fi. And also, if you're a foreign listener coming to Helsinki for Slush, so we also have a FinTech side event. You can find it on the Slush platform. So highly recommend to apply for that one.
And we'll be there as well, right?
Absolutely.
We're
Yes.
going to be there as well, so we'll see you all there. Until the next time, please hit the subscribe button, hit the bell, share this episode. If you've enjoyed what we've talked about, if you've enjoyed any of our episodes, please share it with your friends, colleagues, or anyone else that you think might like FinTech Daydreaming. The more people listen to us, the more we get excited about doing more. So keep the feedback and the comments coming. Until next time, this has been FinTech Daydreaming.
This is FinTech Daydreaming.